Did their homework assignment?
What? Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you did because I already graded them. Grades are already up. We're noon? Okay. So, oh yeah, that's right. We were talking about the history of OSs with a bunch of S's last time. I had you guys kind of throw out a whole bunch of what your favorite operating system is, that kind of stuff, kind of, tricking you into listing distributions, right? Now, realistically, we all know that those two terms are used interchangeably, right? When, people who say Windows 7, they refer to it as an operating system. Okay, I'm just telling you, technically under the hood, the operating system for Windows 7 is actually the NT kernel, not Windows 7 itself. Windows 7 is a distribution which is a bunch of software wrapped around the actual operating system, which is the kernel. Okay, and we'll talk about those today. Okay, so let's kind of go back and deal with the history of these guys. And we're going to look at the Windows side of things first. So history of OSs. So first operating system that we would recognize on the Microsoft-y side of things is DOS, right? And do we all know the where DOS came from?
Stolen. That's somebody's scratch.
Not stolen. So kind of a quick version of the Microsoft backstory is, so we all heard of Microsoft, right? And Bill Gates. How many of you are aware of probably the most profitable meeting in history when Microsoft met with IBM? You heard of this story before? Okay. Have I told it in one of your classes?
Maybe.
All right. So, in any case, Microsoft, this is in the very early days of personal computing when, computers were coming down to the size of something that would fit on a desk or something like that. And back then, the cool tech company was IBM. They were the Apple or the Google of today. Okay, or the Microsoft of 8 years ago, 9 years ago, something like that. Okay, this was IBM back in the let's say early 80s, late 70s. Okay, Microsoft, Bill Gates and cronies, they go into a meeting with IBM because IBM's wanting to get into this personal computer space because that's what they do. They do tech stuff. But this idea of operating systems wasn't really a thing at the time. Existing operating systems at the time were commercial enterprise-y type operating systems that were focused more on productivity than on user friendliness. Okay, but now once we start moving the computer into the home and we have all sorts of different untrained people using them, now we have to start caring about the operating system being somewhat usable. Okay, and we talked last time about the operating system kind of sitting between us and the hardware so that we don't have to, well, in the old days, twist the vacuum tubes, and in the new days, somehow miniaturize ourselves and interact with the transistors directly, which would be significantly more difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. All right, so what Microsoft did in this meeting is they really invented the idea of licensing software. So they sat in there and they said, hey, you guys want to make this hardware to IBM, and you need an operating system for this, so that your consumers can use it. And and the thing is, just so there's no risk to you, we don't want to sell you the operating system. We want to license it to you on a per machine basis. Every single time you sell a computer, one of your IBM computers, at that point in time, you'll pay us a licensing fee for the software. So if you're IBM and you're just starting to test the waters for personal computing, and you have a company sitting in front of you that says, look, you don't have to pay us until you actually sell something. That's a pretty good deal, right? Okay, kind of like, people who advertise with Groupon, right? Groupon is actually a more expensive way for places to market. But the way Groupon actually works behind the scenes is if you want to advertise something, you don't actually have to pay the marketing cost until the deal is actually on, until enough people buy it. So Groupon, more expensive to advertise with, but you only pay if it works. If that makes sense. Okay? So, this model works today, it worked back then. So famous quote, IBM said, no problem, the real money's in the hardware. And we know that's not the case today, right? Okay, so they coined the deal, shake hands, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So Microsoft has agreed to license their software to license their operating system to IBM on a per machine basis. One little problem. What was that problem? They didn't have an operating system. Okay, they just sold IBM smoke and mirrors. They did not have an operating system. So they leave this meeting with this amazing deal with IBM that they think is going to change the future, and it really did, without a product to fulfill any licensing things. So now they got to go out and find a piece of software. So there's this guy. He actually later became one of the, I don't know if he was one of the founders or maybe one of the idea guys for a company called Digital Computers. Kind of went away, got absorbed by one of the big guys. But in any case, this guy ran a little electronic shop. And as a hobbyist, as a computer programmer, he had written an operating system, okay, for fun. Okay, that's what he wrote back then. That's what geeks did. Okay, they wrote operating systems. So he wrote this operating system. Microsoft heard about this through the grapevine. This is before Microsoft was Microsoft. This is just three dudes who most people won't give the time of day to. They just happen to have already called themselves Microsoft. Okay, so they go in and say, hey, we hear you have an operating system, blah, blah, blah. The guys telling them about it and stuff like that. Well, we want to buy it from you. The guy didn't even know why anybody would want to buy it. Okay, so Microsoft offers them $50,000. Okay, so you run this little dumpy electronics store. You wrote a piece of software on the side as a hobby. Okay, and this is let's just use a round number, 1980. Okay, so this is 1980. Somebody walks in off the street and offers you $50,000 for your hobby software that you slap together. What do you say?
Here you go.
You say yes. Okay, you say yes. This is compatible with today. I mean, when we talk about Microsoft, a lot of us want to kind of demonize Microsoft. I think we had this discussion a little bit last time. People assume that I'm kind of an Apple fanboy, where I'm not. I'm almost the first person to rip on Apple when they do something stupid. But the punchline is people tend to demonize Microsoft for no good reason other than being a big company and doing things in the easiest possible way. Microsoft is known for stealing things, right? Well, how many of you have heard of the thing, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than for permission?
Yeah.
Okay? Well, our legal system allows for this. So Microsoft goes and steals something from somebody. That somebody then goes and sues Microsoft. Microsoft settles outside the court. Microsoft got what they wanted, and the person, probably the kid who wrote this software in his underwear in grandma's basement, just walked away with $3 million. Everybody wins. Okay? Because that underwear boy, okay, probably was not going to be able to turn their product into something real because they don't have the marketing resources that somebody like Microsoft has.
Might have with Jared.
Well, yeah. Possibly. Yeah. But punchline is that's the world we live in today, and it's easy to demonize Microsoft for those kind of business practices, but all the big companies do it. Right? I mean, it's a chicken or the egg thing. When almost all of these big company acquisitions happen as a result of, company B complaining that company A is infringing on their patent or something like that, and as part of the settlement, big company A ends up buying big company B. Problem solved. People get paid. Big company that stole the stuff in the first place now owns the stuff that they sold, so it's as if a crime never happened, right? Everybody's happy. So in any case, they walk in, 50 grand, guy says yes. 50 grand back then was substantially more money than 50 grand is today, but still.
I did the calculation.
Okay.
1980. Well, that's the equivalent to $144,000 today.
Okay. So, again, still not a ridiculous amount of money, but none of us in here are turning down 144 grand, right? Okay, I mean, that's life-changing money. If you had $144,000 just sitting in the bank, a lot of the decisions you make today would change, right? You might make a decision where that isn't necessarily based on whether or not you could pay next month's power bill. True story, right? I mean, sometimes Nick and I talk about this stuff fairly often. I mean, hey, I work 75 hours a week. Why? Well, I got a power bill to pay. If you had 144 grand in the bank, you might be able to do some stuff that might, in the future, benefit you, but isn't the means to the end for what you need for next month's power bill, right? Okay, so in any case, guy says yes. Now Microsoft has their operating system, yada, yada, yada. So we're going to say that the first actual operating system in our modern times is the DOS, disk operating system. This is disk operating system. Okay? Now, and we're just going to kind of go down the Microsoft lineage first, then we'll jump over to the Apple side of things. So just me, or is it about 4,000 degrees in here? It's hot in here? Man. I didn't know if I was sweating because I'm fat and hadn't been drinking coffee, but story I got yesterday is apparently the maintenance folks, which are right underneath us here, they turn off our air conditioning all the time because they can't, it's loud and they can't hear it when they have their meetings and they forget to turn it back on. Mighty nice of them. All right, so in any case, later on, Microsoft comes out with their first graphical user interface based operating system, right? So we're going to say the first one was Windows 3.1. Yeah, there was Windows 3.0. There was actually a Windows 2.0, but whatever. We'll say Windows 3.1 is the first one that people cared about. And there's kind of an interesting backstory to that when we go over to the Apple side of things, because in the early days, Apple also ran DOS, right? So the early Apple computers, not Macintosh, the early Apple computers ran DOS, disk operating system, on all their stuff. So at that point in time, Apple, Microsoft were friends. Okay, and then Steve Jobs had a buddy over at Xerox. Xerox had internally started working on a project called the Xerox Star, which was a graphical user interface based operating system computer, kind of diving into the personal computer world. So this is the time of personal computers kind of rising before they were cool, before people knew they were going to take off. Internally, Xerox decided, you know what? Real money's in copy machines, okay, not computers. So they abandoned the Xerox Star project, decided to stick with copy machines, stick with what they've done. Well, they've done all right. You know, Xerox has done okay, but real money's probably in computers over copy machines, but whatever. So they invite Apple to come in, the Apple engineers to come in, and basically they handed over all of the Xerox Star stuff to Apple. Now the Xerox engineers weren't happy about this because they had worked really hard for all this stuff and were doing some really cool crap. Now they were just handing it over because the company they worked for had discontinued the project and happened to be friends with Apple. You know, probably for a future, favor or something like that, whatever it is. So Apple was kind of handed the graphic user interface kind of concepts. And then internally, the storyline kind of goes that Microsoft stole it. Okay, so Apple was handed something that Microsoft then stole. So when Steve Jobs is on stage, it's actually interesting. I've tried to find the exact video. Not sure if this is the one or not, but at some point I've seen it where Steve Jobs is on stage announcing the first Macintosh computer. First Macintosh computer was the first computer that Apple made that had the graphic user interface on it that they evolved from the Xerox Star stuff that they got. And about halfway through his talk, he gets the news in his earpiece that machines are launching overseas with Microsoft Windows on them. That looks shockingly like what Steve Jobs is announcing on stage right now. So basically, halfway through this talk, he gets word that Microsoft stole from them. And you could see his expression change, but he tries to hold it together for the rest of the thing. So it's kind of an interesting historical thing. You can go and look for it. Last couple times I've tried to look for it in class. I haven't been able to find the right clip, but whatever. It's interesting when you know to look for it. Okay? But in any case, so at that point in time, Apple, Microsoft, probably not friends now, right? Okay, so they kind of part ways. Worked out okay for Apple because they were transitioning to the Macintosh line. Internally at Apple for a long period of time, they really had two competing units. So Apple was not a fun place to work in the early days of Apple. I mean, Steve Jobs was known to be a lunatic, and he'd work people long 18-hour days, stuff like that. until they couldn't stay awake anymore. And then he pitted them against each other. He created 2 units inside the company, one for the Apple line of things, so continue with what was already working, and then one with the future-facing Macintosh graphical user type thing, and let's see who wins type stuff. Well, obviously, Macintosh, the idea of graphical user stuff took off, right? Okay, well, somewhere in that little a time period is also when Steve Jobs got kicked out of the company, but towards the end of that. In any case, Microsoft, and this gets us back over to the Microsoft side of things, Microsoft releases Windows, let's just say 3.1. Windows 3.1 is still based on the DOS operating system. The actual kernel of Windows 3.1 was DOS. So what we think of as Windows is actually the graphical user interface is called windowing software, okay, or a window manager. Okay, but it's running on top of the exact same operating system that their machines were running off of a week prior to that. It just happens to be that they have a program that's launching at boot time called win.bat. Is the name of the file. Okay, win.bat, that would launch automatically. It was, do you remember the name of the file it was stored in that actually caused it to launch?
No.
What's the old school equivalent of our modern startup folder? Anything you throw in the startup folder starts up? There's a file on the old Windows computers called autoexec.bat. Any lines of code you put in autoexec.bat automatically got launched by the operating system. So the last line of that would always be win.bat, which would actually launch your Windows manager. So I guess interesting history crap there. Yeah, it was bad. So anyways, our first operating system we remember from Microsoft ran on DOS. What came after Windows 3.1? Well, Windows 3.1 came Windows 95. Now, if we're kind of giving some claim to fame of each of these operating systems, Windows 3.1, what did this guy bring? It brought a GUI. Okay, DOS was all text-based before this. Now you have a graphical user interface, clicking with mouse, and you have pictures and crap on the screen. Okay, Windows 95, we mentioned this last time. Windows 95 brought a couple of things to fruition. The biggest thing that most of us are definitely aware of is the modern interface. So, the exact same thing that we complained about when Windows 8 came out, that, hey, where's my start menu? Okay, is what was really introduced with Windows 95, this kind of our modern look and feel about an operating system. So Windows 95 brought the new start menu-based GUI, but more importantly, it brought multitasking. All right, but something came before Windows 95. It was between Windows 3.1 and Windows 95, and this was a product called Windows NT 3.51. Okay, Windows NT 3.51. And Windows NT 3.51 actually did not run on DOS. It ran on something called the NT kernel. NT, does anybody know what NT stands for? Pretty close. New technology. New technology. All right, so this was a brand new kernel that Microsoft was working on themselves. They actually, well, I'm sure they stole parts of it, but this was something they could internally say, hey, we pretty much wrote this. Where DOS, they just bought from Dude, right? All right, so really Windows 3.51 is where multitasking was initially introduced. Okay, Windows NT 3.51, which nobody used, supported multitasking. This is the Windows 3.1 interface with multitasking and a new, probably buggy, probably didn't support anything, kernel. But this was the birth of our modern operating systems on the Microsoft side. All right, so what did Windows 95 do? It kept the multitasking, but added a fresh UI. We'll say start menu. All right, so that was Windows 95. What came next? Windows 98. Okay, Windows 98 still ran on top of DOS, except somewhere in here, DOS got rebranded. They no longer called it DOS because nobody cared about DOS anymore. We had several years of disconnect. It became known as the 9X kernel. Okay, the 9X kernel. Fancy, cool way of saying DOS. All right. So Windows 98, 9X kernel. And what did this guy have? Well, same user interface as we had before. Added some additional driver support. Okay, because this is kind of during that time frame where lots and lots of hardware companies were coming out with products for you to install on your computers, whether it's graphics cards or external drives. Some of them had kind of proprietary stuff, like there was iOmega had a thing called the zip drive that you'd have special drivers for, and there was a whole bunch of things like that. Windows 98 kind of created a playground that allowed third-party companies to write drivers that were likely to work with the operating system. It had that in mind. Where when Windows 95 came out, that concept of having a whole bunch of hardware made by third-party manufacturers wasn't really a thing. Okay, it was kind of 2 years ahead. So that was Windows 98. Next year, well, the next one is Windows 2000. And this caused a lot of headaches. A lot of people were really, really, really ticked off about Windows 2000. Now, interestingly enough, I might say that Windows 2000 is among Microsoft's most successful operating systems ever. In fact, you can probably still find some companies that are still running Windows 2000 servers. That would not shock me. Issue is this. If you are Joe Consumer and you're over at Best Buy, this existed at the time, and that was the place you went to buy your software. So you're over at Best Buy, and you see on the shelf the box for Windows 2000, and you have Windows 98 at home. You think Windows 2000 is the natural upgrade. Totally was not. Okay? Windows 2000 was not the upgrade to Windows 2000 to Windows 98. What was it the upgrade to? Missing a dude in here. Windows NT 4.0. Windows NT 4.0 had the 95 interface with the NT kernel. Okay, so now 95 and NT, kind of the same operating system, certainly looked the same, but based on a different under-the-hood technology. Okay, one of them had the newest, latest, greatest V8 engine, whatever. The other one inside had one of those like 8 hamsters on a bunch of like connected wheels. So, in any case, looked very similar, but under the hood were very different. Windows 2000 was actually the upgrade to Windows NT 4, which ran on the NT kernel.
With the NT.
Yeah. I'm just keeping it consistent with what we did up here.
Which was now better than DOS or still worse?
Let's say still worse, but that's I don't know that you can even ever say it's better or worse, right? Yes. But Windows 2000 was based on the NT kernel. So we're going to say this guy was super stable, so definitely better from a stability perspective. Okay, this is during the whole time period where the phrase "blue screen of death" was ubiquitous. Okay, or the 3-finger salute, Control Alt Delete. Okay, to restart the machine. Okay, this was ubiquitous on the 9X kernel side of things. All right, but again, and this is something I use fairly often when talking about Microsoft today. Even back then, well, and especially today, but Microsoft has always solved a very, very, very difficult problem. They're writing a single piece of software that's meant to run on a whole bunch of different machines. Now, back then, there were fewer different machines, but Microsoft didn't make computers. Microsoft made software that ran on other computers. It ran on Compaq computers, Hewlett-Packards, Packard Bell, Digital, Acer, all these companies, some of which are still in existence today, some of which aren't, but, punchline is their software ran on all these different machines. And back then, hardware was significantly more proprietary than it is today. Today our hardware kind of is, a large portion of it is consistent because we have some standards. Like when you go and get the latest, greatest, coolest graphics card, the one that just came out that's $800 or something like that, it has a whole lot in common with last year's $800 graphics card. Okay, it's a superset of it. So what you have is you have all the instructions it used to have. Most of them are going to at the very least be DirectX compatible. All of them are going to be DirectX and OpenGL in reality. So they all have built into it the hardware-based libraries that could do all the cool 3D graphic-y stuff. Okay? Then what are they going to have beyond last year's model? They're going to have more transistors, more cores. A lot of people aren't. For instance, when we look at our modern day CPUs, a quad core, fairly common. That's pretty powerful. We have some dual quad cores. AMD makes an octa core, right? On the Intel side, really their top processor is a 6-core processor, but let's say something in that range. 4, 6, 8. How many processors are in our modern high-end graphics cards? 2 to 4? 2 to 4 cores?
Yeah.
Okay. Higher.
16,000?
Thousands is a whole lot closer. Probably 2048 would be my guess. Could be. They might have certain ones that specifically say shaders on them or something like that. But in any case, thousands of processors. Because the definition of a processor has to change in our mind. When we think about cores as it comes to like Intel or an Intel Core i7 processor, we're thinking about a CPU core that knows how to do a zillion magic tricks. I've always mentioned CPUs do magic tricks, and that's our programming languages where that maps. So this is where we're kind of connecting those. Well, that's a very general purpose, jack of all trades CPU. Where each of those 4 cores in a quad-core i7 knows how to do 5,000 things. Okay? That's not the case. Okay? In the doctor's graphics card, each of those 2,000 processors doesn't know how to do 5,000 things. It knows how to do like 8 things. Okay? And all of them have to do with floating point math. Okay? So all of those individual, they're called GPUs, graphic processing units. Okay? Each one of those cores is really, really, really good at math. It can't do anything else. It doesn't have all those extra magic tricks. It knows this one skill, okay? But it has 2,000 buddies that it can divide up your screen, all the things that are happening on your screen at once, and it can say, okay, I'm going to take these 4 pixels, and I will handle all the colors that should show up in those 4 pixels. I got this, okay? And then his 2,000 buddies handle the other parts of the screen. Okay? That's why graphic cards have so many different cores in it, and that's why more cores is better, because it's a very specialized task that they're doing. Okay, so I guess interesting punchline or whatever, but the connection here that I was trying to make with Windows 2000 is that when Windows 2000 came out, a large consumer base assumed it was the upgrade to Windows 98. The name would indicate that would be the case, correct? So a lot of people went out and bought Windows 2000, brought it home. Guess what happened? Blue screen of death problems went away because Windows 2000 is extremely stable. There was some website a while ago that actually kept tabs, like some kind of like a record running total of machines that were still running without a reboot. And I think Windows 2000 was in the top 3 behind like a couple of Unix machines. Okay, like these machines that have been on for like a decade. That survived power outages because of battery backups and stuff like that. Windows 2000, very stable, and was probably the catalyst for why NT ended up taking over. Okay, this is like, hey, we clearly have a really stable operating system, and everybody jokes about the blue screen of death from the other operating system. But what did 98 have that Windows 2000 didn't? It had a lot of driver support. So all of this crap, all this early gaming stuff, proprietary-ish type hardware, scanners, stuff like that, things that have a lot of standards associated with them today, but were much more proprietary back then, that worked in Windows 98 because there were already drivers written for the 9X kernel for it, did not have drivers for the NT kernel. So half your crap didn't work. Make sense? So 2000 made many consumer machines worse because none of your stuff worked, but it didn't crash. Okay? So this was kind of a big marketing issue for them, but at the same time, a very good operating system for them. So we see very clearly now that we have kind of two lineage lines. We have the kind of the consumer line of operating systems from Microsoft, which is the 9X kernel. And then we have the business line of operating system from them, which is based on the NT kernel. So business, all about stability, less about hardware compatibility and gaming and, fun type stuff. What was the upgrade to Windows 98? I use 98. I use the word upgrade very loosely.
I think it was XP. No, it was.
Yep.
Yeah.
Windows ME, Windows Millennium.
Yeah.
Okay, so Windows Millennium came out, still based on the 9X kernel. Okay. And this was supposed to be completely consumer-centric, and everybody hated it. Broke a bunch of stuff. A whole bunch of drivers stopped working. Famous thing here is Dell was, back then Dell was kind of like the computer company for Windows-based things. Now it becomes a little bit more spread out. This was back in the days, the whole dude, you're getting the Dell commercials.
Yeah,
Have you seen those?
I
Okay.
remember those.
I wonder what that guy's doing now. The dude, you're getting the Dell guy. Extra credit. Somebody post about it on Slack sometime. In any case, this was a really bad operating system. Let's just go that route. Well, Dell computers, they had machines shipping with Windows Millennium. Like, whenever a new operating system comes out, all the new machines ship with it. Dell offered a free program to upgrade to Windows 98. They would send you a Windows 98 restore disk to upgrade your Windows Millennium machine to Windows
I know
98.
what the guy's doing.
Arrested in February
For
2003
marijuana.
buying a
Life
bag of
after Dell. Yeah.
Arrested for marijuana?
Yeah.
Well, that's not a big deal.
And then,
Must not live in
2015,
Wisconsin.
Curtis has been a recurring guest
Guest
spot
spot.
on Adult Swim's The Jack and Triumph Show. He is simply referred to as the Dell guy or the Dell dude.
Yeah, so he's done all right for himself.
yeah. Little point, after Dell.
Kind of a low point. Okay. So anyways, Windows Millennium, we're going to say this was the death of the 9X kernel. Okay, so the next operating system that came out from Microsoft was Windows XP. And this was the point in time where the consumer and the business lines merged. Okay, so now this is our first consumer operating system by Microsoft that was based on the NT kernel. Okay? Arguably, you could say Windows XP has been Microsoft's most successful operating system. Secondarily, you can probably throw Windows 7 in the same category. I think both of those have been highly successful. I bet you their numbers of people that rated as the best operating system they've ran are probably similar. Certainly Windows 7 is a significantly newer operating system, but it's not going to run as well on older hardware. So for instance, a couple years ago, the netbooks were really popular, right? Remember the really small laptops, and there's nothing wrong with them. There's nothing wrong. Well, no, but this would not be a netbook.
No.
This is kind of the evolutionary next step after netbooks. So netbooks were very underpowered machines that did not really have the horsepower or battery life to do anything legit. Okay, and a lot of them shipped with Windows 7, which was way too much software for something that had that level of horsepower. Kind of like pulling a yacht with a 4-cylinder Civic or something like that. Okay.
I've seen people.
Okay. Now, the reality is because, I mean, back then Intel was really pushing this thing called the Atom processor. Okay, really low-powered ARM-based processor. Actually, it was not ARM-based, but low-powered processor, supposed to be good for battery life and stuff like that. So that's great. But they were trying to push a very modern operating system with that, and that wasn't so great. Okay, so what did you see happen? So our Best Buy guy, what did you see those machines shipping with?
Oh, with those, they ship with Windows 7 a lot of times.
Okay, but when they fixed that, what did they start shipping with?
Oh, XP.
Yeah, so they started running XP, which was a very popular operating system, but was an operating system that existed with hardware that was much more similar to what those netbooks had in them. Make sense? So now you had a pretty good operating system, XP. I mean, any of you still running XP in here? And that's not a big deal. It probably hasn't really hurt you, right?
No.
It works for everything. I mean, XP is, like I said, arguably Microsoft's most successful operating system. Windows 7 has been really good as well. But the nice thing about XP is it will run well on weaker hardware. So that's where it really held its own in the netbook stuff. And there really isn't that great of an arguable jump from XP to Windows 7 outside of security stuff. Okay, that's where Windows 7 really did a lot. Okay, XP, great operating system. What came after Windows XP? Windows Vista.
Horrible
Okay.
piece of junk. Oh.
Okay. Well, now here's an issue here, though. Vista gets a bad name for itself. Vista was a perfectly good operating system.
Not if you beta tested it.
Perfectly good operating system, but what are the goals of an operating system?
Be secure.
Okay. Well, the operating system has multiple goals. Okay, last time Nick was telling us it's kind of the middleman between us and the hardware. So at the very least, the top level goal for an operating system is to let us tell the hardware what to do. Communicate with it, right? Great. So it has to do that. Ideally, it would also be convenient to use. It'd be fast and, you know, a joy to use. Doesn't feel like you're pulling teeth, that kind of stuff. Okay, and then tertiarily, we want it to be secure, especially in today's world. Okay, well, this becomes a problem. And this is another area where Microsoft gets demonized. Okay. Microsoft, if you're one of the bad guys, the hackers, the virus writers, whatever, okay, you're typically, I mean, this is really cyber terrorism, right? Okay, you're typically in this to piss off the most people as possible. If you're writing a virus, are you going, because, you know, the Macintosh fanboys, what do they say? They say, oh, Macs don't have viruses. Macs don't have viruses because they're better, right? Now, I could probably make an argument that the Mac OS, the modern Mac OS, is probably a little bit more virus resistant than the modern Windows thing, but that has nothing to do with Apple. It's because it has a very time-tested Unix kernel that it's running on. But it's not that viruses are impossible on the Mac, okay? Bottom line is, if you're a virus writer, are you going to attack the zillion people that are running Windows, or are you going to attack the 4 people that are running Mac? Well, your goal is to piss off as many people as possible, so let's write our viruses for Windows, okay? No wonder there's so many of them, all right? This has nothing to do with Windows being a crappy piece of software. Right? Microsoft hires the smartest people on the planet, just like Apple does, just like Google does. These are all brilliant software engineers and researchers and all this stuff. They just happen to be, as I've already mentioned, Microsoft happens to be solving a very, very difficult problem. And they've become very, very popular. And because of that, they have a huge target on their back. Okay? So we should all be pretty impressed that Microsoft does as well as it does. I mean, it's kind of shocking how good Windows is when you consider the problem they're solving. I can make a similar statement regarding, not as strong of a statement, but on the mobile side of things, regarding Android. So Android versus iOS. I mean, realistically speaking, if you compare the two platforms, I think most people could at least come to terms with the fact that iOS is more polished. Okay? But the reality is Apple controls both sides of the coin. They write software for their own hardware. No wonder it just works. Well, you got Google over here writing Android for a zillion different handsets made by a whole bunch of different companies with different processors and different cameras and different everything. Android's pretty good when you consider that problem, right? How many of you are Android users in here? Okay. How many of you who have your hands up have been long time Android users? Okay. So you could vouch that Android sucked, not 4, 5, 6 years ago, and it's shockingly evolved since then, to the point where let's say, in all fairness, the two platforms are basically equal level competitors. Android's really good. And when you consider the problem that they're solving, it's shocking how well they've solved that problem. And realistically, especially in the modern day, Apple's kind of going backwards a little bit from a developer's perspective. This is something we'll talk about in the 390 class. But one of the big things about Apple, especially doing mobile development for them, is our applications are able to be more polished because we were only targeting specific screen sizes. Okay, we didn't have to make these apps that worked on 50 different screen orientations and different sizes, and the 5.5 inch screens and the 2.8 inch screens and all this other stuff. So Apple would always say that Android was fragmented. That was their phrase. Android's fragmented, which was true. They don't use that phrase so much anymore because Apple is becoming fragmented. Okay, Apple now has 3.5 inch screens. They don't sell them anymore, but they exist, and software still has to run on them. 4 inch screens, 5.5 inch screens now, 4.7 inch screens, and then you have the iPad side of things. At least the iPad side of things have stayed consistent. They're all the same size screen, or doubling of. When they went to Retina, that was okay because they just doubled the resolution when they went to Retina. That wasn't a horrible fragmenting thing. But punchline is this: Apple's kind of doing what they said used to be bad. is I guess the punchline there. But in any case, Windows Vista obviously often gets demonized because it was inconvenient to use. There was nothing wrong with the operating system from it doing its job. It was a very secure operating system. It was just annoying to use because it would constantly ask you, are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you want to do this? All right. Just to wrap this Windows side up here real quick. So then came out Windows 7, still based on the NT kernel. And what was Windows 7? Windows 7 was Windows Vista that was less annoying. I think that's a fair enough summary of what Windows 7 was. It was everything Windows Vista was supposed to be, but hey, we turned off some of the annoyingness. And they evolved a couple of other things in there as well. Windows 8, still NT kernel. Good operating system, stable operating system, but new interface did not go over well. People don't like change. All right, so we'll pick up there next time. I'll probably also give you a homework assignment next time. Yeah, whatever. It'll be fun. Also, outside chance of a quiz next time related to something we talked about today. FYI. All right, I'll see everybody on Friday.